Okay, chapter 14, the giver. It was much the same, this memory, though the hill seemed to be a different one, steeper, and the snow was not falling as thickly as it had before. It was colder also, Jonas perceived. He could see, as he sat waiting at the top of the hill, that the snow beneath the sled was not thick and soft as it had been before, but hard and coated with bluish ice. So the giver says, I'm going to give you a bad memory, essentially, right? And up to this point, the worst thing that he's experienced, Jonas, is a sunburn. What do you think is going to happen on this sled?
I think it's going to fall off.
Okay.
He's going to slam his face into the ice.
What's it called?
Experience pain that all of us.
I think that's a pretty rough description of what's going to happen.
We know it's not going to be pretty either way.
No, but it's
And he's
something
gonna-
called. You can kind of get an idea. I can't remember what they're called.
Frostbite?
Frostbite? Ooh, frostbite or an injury. Okay.
I didn't get it.
The sled moved forward, and Jonas grinned with delight, looking forward to the breathtaking slide down through the invigorating air. But the runners this time couldn't slice through the frozen expanse as they had on the other snow-cushioned hill. They skittered sideways, and the sled gathered speed. Jonas pulled at the rope, trying to steer, but the steepness and speed took control from his hands, and he was no longer enjoying the feeling of freedom, but instead, terrified, was at the mercy of the wild acceleration downward over the ice. Sideways spinning, the sled hit a bump in the hill, and Jonas was jarred loose and thrown violently into the air. He fell with his leg twisted under him and could hear the crack of bone. His face scraped along jagged edges of ice, and when he came at last to a stop, he lay shocked and still, feeling nothing at first but fear. And then the first wave of pain. He gasped. It was as if a hatchet lay lodged in his leg, slicing through each nerve with a hot blade. In his agony, he perceived the word fire and felt flames licking at the torn bone and flesh. He tried to move, and he could not. The pain grew. He screamed. There was no answer. Sobbing, he turned his head and vomited onto the frozen snow. Blood dripped from his face into the vomit. No, he cried, and the sound disappeared into the empty landscape and into the wind. Then suddenly, he was in the annex room again, writhing on the bed. His face was wet with tears. Able to move now, he rocked his own body back and forth, breathing deeply to release the remembered pain. He sat and looked at his own leg, where it lay straight on the bed, unbroken. The brutal slice of pain was gone, but the leg ached horribly still, and his face felt raw. May I have a relief of pain, please? He begged. It was always provided in his everyday life for the bruises and wounds, for a mashed finger, a stomach ache, a skinned knee from a fall from a bike. There was always a daub of anesthetic ointment or a pill, or in severe instances, an injection that brought complete and instantaneous deliverance. Isn't pain part of life?
Yeah.
Yes, but in this world, because everyone should be the same, they take away pain.
They take away pain. So think about a small child. If you have a small child, then you're like, don't touch that, it's hot. Don't touch that, it's hot.
And they touch it.
And then they touch it, right? Do they learn a lesson?
Yeah.
How many times do they touch it?
17.
No, you don't have kids, obviously.
Once or twice.
Once. If it's hot, they touch it once because they learn automatically, like, oh, I have pain receptors that's been built into my DNA. That's exactly why I don't touch hot things, right?
Do you think in the story that they would release a child for doing that?
Maybe. Write a story about it.
What we tell Elliot is, no, that's hot. And she'll whisper hot back at it and blow on it and then touch it.
But still, even if, like, you say that's hot and she does that, that's a reaction. She's eventually going to get, like, I shouldn't do that. That hurts.
Hot. And then she knows what hot means.
Mhm.
My sister asked to put a fork in the electrical plug.
But the giver said no and looked away. Limping, Jonas walked home, pushing his bicycle that evening. The sunburn pain had been so small in comparison, and it had not stayed with him. But this ache lingered. It was not unendurable as the pain on the hill had been. Jonas tried to be brave. He remembered that the chief elder had said he was brave. Is something wrong, Jonas? His father asked at the evening meal. You're so quiet tonight. Aren't you feeling well? Would you like some medication? But Jonas remembered the rules. No medication for anything involving his training, and no discussion of his training. At the time for sharing of feelings, simply said that he felt tired and his school lessons had been unusually demanding that day. He went to his sleeping room early, and from behind the closed door, he could hear his parents and sister laughing as they gave Gabriel his evening bath. They have never known pain, he thought. Do you notice how that's italicized? Why is it italicized?
Because it's a inner thought.
Because it's an inner thought, right? And if it was an outward thought, if he said it, what would be around it?
Quotation.
Quotation marks. Good job. The realization made him feel desperately lonely, and he rubbed his throbbing leg. He eventually slept. Again and again, he dreamed of the anguish and the isolation on the forsaken hill. The daily training continued, and now it always included pain. The agony of the fractured leg began to seem no more than a mild discomfort as the giver led Jonas firmly, little by little, into deep and terrible suffering of the past. Each time in his kindness, the giver ended the afternoon with a color-filled memory of pleasure. A brisk sail on a blue-green lake, a meadow dotted with yellow wildflowers, an orange sunset behind mountains. It was not enough to assuage the pain that Jonas was beginning now to know. Why, Jonas asked him after he received a torturous memory in which he had been neglected and unfed. The hunger had caused excruciating spasms in his empty, distended stomach. He lay on the bed, aching. Why do you and I have to hold these memories? It gives us wisdom, the giver replied. Without wisdom, I cannot fulfill my function of advising the committee of elders when they call upon me. But what wisdom would you get from hunger? Jonas groaned. His stomach still hurt, though the memory had ended. Some years ago, the giver told him, before your birth, a lot of citizens petitioned the committee of elders. They wanted to increase the rate of births. They wanted each birth mother to be assigned 4 births instead of 3, so that the population would increase and there would be much more laborers available. Jonas nodded, listening. Okay, that makes sense. The idea was that certain family units could accommodate an additional child. Jonas nodded. Mine could, he pointed out. We have Gabriel this year, and it's fun having a 3rd child. The committee of elders sought my advice, the giver said. It made sense to them too, but it was a new idea, and they came to me for wisdom. And you used your memories? The giver said yes. And the strongest memory that came was hunger. It came from generations back. Centuries back. The population had gotten so big that hunger was everywhere. Excruciating hunger and starvation. It was followed by warfare. Warfare? It was a concept that Jonas did not know. But hunger was familiar to him now. Unconsciously, he rubbed his own abdomen, recalling the pain of his unfulfilled needs. So you described that to them. They don't want to hear about pain. They just seek the advice. I simply advised them against increasing the population. But you said that was before my birth. They hardly ever come to you for advice. Only when they, what was it you said? When they have a problem they've never faced before. When did it happen last? Do you remember the day when the plane flew over the community? Yes, I was scared. So were they. They prepared to shoot it down, but they sought my advice. I told them to wait. But how did you know? How did you know the pilot was lost? I didn't. I used my wisdom from the memories. I knew that there had been times in the past, terrible times, when people had destroyed others in haste and fear and had brought about their own destruction. Jonas realized something. That means, he said slowly, that you have memories of destruction, and you have to give them to me too, because I have to get the wisdom. The giver just nodded. But it will hurt, Jonas said. It wasn't a question. It will hurt terribly, the giver agreed. But why can't everyone have the memories? I think it would seem a little easier if the memories were shared. You and I wouldn't have to bear so much of it by ourselves if everybody took part. The giver sighed. You're right, but then everyone would be burdened and pained. They don't want that. And that's the real reason the receiver is so vital to them and so honored. They selected me and you to lift that burden from themselves. When did they decide that? Jonas said angrily. It wasn't fair. Let's change it. How do you suggest we do that? I've never been able to think of a way, and I'm supposed to be the one with all the wisdom. But there are 2 of us now, Jonas said eagerly. Together we can think of something. The giver watched him with a wry smile. Why can't we just apply for a change of rules, Jonas suggested. The giver laughed, and then Jonas, too, chuckled reluctantly. The decision was made long before my time or yours, the giver said, and before the previous receiver, and he waited. Back and back and back. Jonas repeated the familiar phrase. Sometimes it had seemed humorous to him. Sometimes it seemed meaningful and important. Now it was ominous. It meant he knew that nothing could be changed. The new child, Gabriel, was growing and successfully passed the test of maturity that the nurturers gave each month.